I am going to tell you the other day, I went to bed tired and I woke up tired. You ever have that experience? I mean, you go to bed tired and you wake up tired and you're like, what's the point of having been in bed for those hours? Or how about this one? The other day, I gone to bed, went to sleep about 10:30, something like that. Around 3 or so, I found myself awake. Now, I had my head on one of these, a pillow. My body was in the bed, but my mind was racing. In fact, it went on for about an hour or so. I finally just got out of bed and went in the other room, tried to distract myself, get thinking about something other than what I was thinking about. I was telling Cindy about it the next morning. She says, what was your mind like? What were you thinking about? And I said, I was just working. I was thinking about all the stuff at the office and things going on, decisions that need to be made and things going on in people's lives and all the stuff. And I was just, she said, did you get anything done? And I said, no, nothing. But I worked for well over an hour. And my mind was very, very active. I was mentally tired when I got done. It was a waste of time, right? You ever had that experience? Then you're going to want to pay attention to today's message and the one next week, because God's got something for you. You ever had this experience? You go on a vacation, allegedly for the purpose of resting, and when you get back, somebody says to you, so how was it? Was it a great time? Did you just really get rested? And your response was, no, I came back from vacation, and now I have to go back to work so I can rest up. I'm exhausted. Sometimes having fun, recreating, is exhausting for us physically, right? We're going to be talking about rest. And on the surface, it seems like a simple subject, but as it turns out, while it's simple, it has a whole lot of nuances that are very personal to each of us individually. It's a subject that is simple, but it is very, very important. It's a subject that's important to God, and it's important to you and me, whether we realize it or not, and it is a subject that is particularly relevant to those of us who live in North America and live the lifestyle, especially that we live here in the United States. We as Americans are not very good at resting. We're not very good at it for a lot of reasons. We've created a culture where rest is not necessarily celebrated or encouraged, where a work ethic has been championed to the extent that it has supplanted the priority of rest in our lives. When you look at statistics, and there are a lot of them out there, you can do this on your own time, some other time. Don't Google this right now on your phone. But I did, and there are all kinds of statistics, and they all basically say the same thing. Americans aren't good at resting. For instance, roughly 55% of Americans who have paid vacation built into their employment arrangement don't use all of their vacation. About 3/4 of us who have a lunch break don't take it, we work through it. Most children nowadays are being raised in households where every adult in the home is employed outside of the home. Back in 1960, 60 years ago, maybe 20% of women worked. Men typically worked outside of the home. A lot has changed in the last several decades. We've gotten worse at it, not better, when it comes to rest. When we're talking about rest, by the way, I'm not just talking about taking more time off of work. I'm not just talking about taking more vacations, although I'd kind of be in favor of that idea. It sounds pretty good to me. I'm not just talking about getting more sleep at night or spending more time trying to sleep. I am talking about a principle of rest that is really more nuanced than that, as I said, and more personally and individually relevant to us in ways that we need to stop and think through a little bit, and today's message is designed to help you do exactly that. Now, in its simplest form, when we say rest, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about inactivity. If I'm active and I stop being active, I'm at rest. When I'm swimming laps in the pool at Move and I stop swimming and I am at the end of the lane, at the edge of the pool, I'm at rest. If I'm doing something at the office and I stop doing that something and just sit, I'm at rest. If I am a ship at sea and I come to the beach and the ship goes up onto the shore, the ship is at rest. In other words, in its simplest form, rest is inactivity. But when it comes to the biblical theme of rest and what God intends for us, it really is more nuanced than that, and it doesn't just involve physical things. In fact, it involves physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual realities. In other words, I can be at rest physically, but not at rest mentally. That's what happened the other night when I woke up at 3 o'clock. My head was on my pillow, but my mind was tiring itself out. I can be at rest mentally, maybe even physically, but not at rest emotionally or spiritually. There may be inner turmoil going on. By the way, you notice I brought my pillow to church. Just a little side note here, recommendation, something for you to consider. If you're one of those individuals that likes to sleep during the messages, bring your pillow with you on a Sunday. You'll get a lot more rest, and we'll wake you up when the message is over. Just trying to be helpful. It's possible for me to be mentally at rest, inactive, not working, not at the office, not dealing with stuff, emotionally, but physically very active, and that can be a very good thing. In other words, when we think of inactivity or rest, I want you to think multifaceted, not just one-dimensionally with regard to that. But I think all of us understand that there is a type of condition that we can sometimes develop. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional or spiritual, it could be a combination thereof, but we get to a place where we just feel weary. And it's the kind of weariness that just a little bit better night's sleep or a little more time away from the office or the job is not going to resolve. I found myself in that place a while back. Somebody said, "How you doing?" I said, "Nah, I'm just really weary." They said, "Well, you need to take some time off." And it's like, no, taking some time off won't help the kind of weariness I have. It's down deep. It's kind of in my soul. It's in my bones. It's a kind of weariness that I need to address in some other way. And I had the opportunity to do exactly that, and I'm happy to report that I addressed that, and that weariness has been resolved. And we're going to talk about another aspect of that kind of weariness and the sort of rest that Jesus has for us in next week's message, so you won't want to miss that either. But I found myself at a place a while back where, well, I felt some things that I think the psalmist felt when the psalmist wrote this in Psalm 55, verses 6 and 7. "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, then I would fly away and rest. I would fly far away to the quiet of the wilderness." The psalmist is just saying, I'm just stressed. There's just so much tugging at me, so much pulling on me, so many pressures on me, so many people demanding things of me. I just wish I could fly away from it all and just be unplugged. And I think most of us in this room have had a time when we felt like that. Maybe you're feeling like that right now, I don't know. But it's hard for us, especially in this modern day and age, to completely unplug. I mean, to get detached from, unengaged with, unconnected to, unplugged from all the things that we get tied into. And the biggest culprit is this right here. Our phones. And mine was in my back pocket. And not just for the purposes of pulling it out during this message. It's in my back pocket every Sunday when I'm up here speaking. I have a use for it during these Sunday morning environments, and so I keep it with me, and most of the time I remember to put it on silent. Yep, it's on silent, so if it rings, I won't be embarrassed. But we have our phones with us everywhere we go, right? Wrong. I mean, it's true, but it's not right. We're so addicted to keeping connected with everything that's going on, and we have notifications telling us, oh, an email just arrived. Oh, there's a post on Facebook. Oh, you just got a text message. Oh, somebody's calling you. And we feel obligated and compelled to look at our phones over and over and over again. Yesterday, my wife and I were going to go watch the basketball games that our grandkids were in, and so we headed off to Post Falls, and when I got there, I locked the car, and we were walking into the gym, and I reached into my coat pocket for my cell phone, and it wasn't there. And I felt naked. I felt a little anxiety It's like, what am I going to do during those boring moments when my grandchild's sitting on the bench and these other little short people are running back and forth on the court, and I don't care what they're doing. I want to have my phone. And I didn't know what to do without my phone. I want to run home and get it, but it's too far because we're like, I don't have my phone. Right? Come on, am I the only one in the room that feels that way? We are compulsive and addicted and connected and tied to the extent that we don't know how to unplug and detach and fly away, as it were, to the quiet of the wilderness. We don't have any way to get away from it all because we take it all with us in the form of an electronic device. I was sitting in my home yesterday in my recliner, and my wife happened to walk by, and she made this observation. She said, "How are you doing with your multitasking?" And it's like, what? And then I realized what was going on. I was sitting in my recliner with my laptop in my lap with these slides on it. I was working on today's message. And on the TV was one of our favorite TV programs, and in my hand was my phone, and I was busy on my phone. I had 3 screens going, and I was oblivious to actually what was happening until she said something, and then I answered her question. "How are you doing with your multitasking?" she asked. I said, "Not very well," because I wasn't doing any of it really well. So I got rid of 2 of the screens and focused on the 3rd. You're wondering which 2 lost out. I closed this screen and set my phone aside, and we watched the TV show we were both trying to watch together. Say, "Pastor, misplaced priorities. TV show over the morning message for Sunday." Yeah, this is already pretty well pulled together. But we are like that, right? We're addicted to screens. Teenagers and 20-somethings typically are the worst offenders, but people my age and older aren't a whole lot better. In our culture today, we just are so plugged into and entangled with everything in our life that it's hard to literally unplug from that and unwind and decompress and rest in ways that God wants us to. And the problem has something to do with technology, but it also has to do with the fact that we just don't get this idea of rest like we should. And I say we because I am myself in a process of discovery well into my adult life that I should have probably experienced a long time ago. And that is the discovery of how important rest is to how God made us and what He intends for us and the example that He Himself set. You see, I realized I needed to go all the way back to the beginning, as is the case with so many of these themes that we talk about and so many things that the Bible wants to communicate, that God wants to communicate to us through His Word, through the Scriptures, that we have to go back to the beginning to get a proper frame of reference, a proper starting point in our thinking. And we go all the way back to creation in Genesis chapter 1, and we find that God's busy for 6 days creating. He creates the heavens and the earth and the sun and the moon and the stars and the plants and the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and all of that. And each day, as the day concludes, after He's done His work of creation, He says it's good. And then again, it's good. And then again, and then He says, oh, and it's very good. And then He gets to the 7th day. And here's what it tells us in Genesis 2, verse 2. By the 7th day, God had finished the work He'd been doing. So on the 7th day, He what? He what? From all His work. Now, God didn't rest because He was tired. He rested, meaning He went from very active to inactive. He didn't have to rest because He was tired. The Bible says God doesn't ever weary, doesn't ever get tired. He doesn't sleep or slumber. He just rested. He was busy working. He wasn't tired, but He just stopped. And then it says in verse 3 that once He stopped, that He blessed the 7th day and made it holy because on it He what? Rested from all the work of creating that He had done. Now, I look at that, and there's something that really strikes me, and that's this. Not only that He rested, I knew that, but I never really paid attention to this fact. He blessed the 7th day. 6 other days full of activity, full of creative genius and brilliance. I mean, God's just doing amazing things and creating the universe as we know it. And 6 days full of that kind of work, that kind of activity is just amazing. And he looks at what he's done and he says it's good. But when he gets to the 7th day, he does something unique. He blesses that day. I never really noticed that. And it tells me there's something about the 7th day and the idea that we should rest and cease from labor or activity like God himself did, that we don't understand. I've read that before, but I have to confess, I don't really get why. I get a little better than ever that it's important, but I don't get why it's so important, this idea of rest. But it is important enough that God took that one day out of 7 and blessed it. Not the other 6 days of work, the day of rest. He blessed it, said it's holy, something special about this day. Because on it, God himself rested. Rest is so important that this idea makes it into the 10 Commandments. Now, the Old Testament actually has in the law that was given to the nation of Israel over 600 commandments. But as we know, 10 of them were singled out by God to be put on stone tablets. And he used his finger, the Bible tells us, and he etched those into stone. And he did it not once but twice because Moses broke the first set of stone tablets. And so he does it again. And among those 10 is this, the Sabbath, this idea of rest. In Exodus 20, starting in verse 8, says, remember the Sabbath day. By keeping it holy 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Verse 10, on it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, not even your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, not only do I see this emphasis come through here again, for the second time, one of many times in the scripture, but there's something else that stands out here, that rest is not just for my sake or yours. It's not just for your sake, but also for the Lord. Did you catch that? It is a Sabbath that is holy and for the Lord. Now, what does that mean? Does he need somehow to rest up because he's tired? No, we know that that's not the case. Does he need us to rest that somehow that satisfies a need that he has? No, that's not the point. The point is that in us resting, we then create margin emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually in our life. We create room for a focus on our relationship with him. It's a day that is holy. Holy means set aside. It's a day that is set aside for the purpose of, or it is a time in our schedule. Don't get too legalistic about it being Saturday or Sunday or whatever. It is a time in the rhythm of our life that is set aside specifically for the purpose that we would rest, that we would recharge, that we would rejuvenate, but also that we would have margin in our life to be able to focus on the most important relationship any of us ever have, the one with our Creator. And he's saying this day is holy unto me. It's a Sabbath for you and for me. And I missed that before in previous readings of this particular text. Rest is not just for your sake, but also for the Lord. But I also noticed this, that rest, for there to be rest in our lives, we must have intentionality. For you to have rest, for me to have rest, we must do it on purpose. We must be intentional. God is very specific. He's saying, listen, this won't happen unless you make it happen. 6 days I was busy creating, and then I just set aside a whole day and I rested on that day on purpose, not even because I was tired, but because I wanted to intentionally create margin, space, room for, breathing room, we might call it, room to rest. And God's saying, if you don't do it on purpose, that's why he puts it into the law like he does. If you don't make it intentional, it's not going to happen. You'll have good intentions. You'll maybe think about it. You'll maybe even block out some time. And then when that time comes, something else will crowd in on it. And you'll go not just days or weeks or months or years, but decades perhaps, and realize that you never really had the kind of rhythm when it comes to rest that you should have had. Rest is not just for our sake, but also for the Lord's and for our time together with him, quality time with him. And it is also something that needs to be intentional. And both of those things show up not just here and other places in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament. And here's one example in Mark chapter 6. Jesus and the disciples are busy meeting the needs of a lot of people. And it says, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he, Jesus, said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. In other words, guys, we're going to go spend some quality time together. You 12 and me, away from the crowds, away from the demands, away from the needs that we've been busy addressing. Nothing wrong with that, but we need to take a little break. You haven't even had a chance to eat. You need some time to decompress. You need some time to rest. So he was intentional. Verse 32. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But as so often happens when you and I try to create some margin and some space in our schedules for rest, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. They went by land over to the place on the opposite side of the lake. So when the boat got there, guess what? Instant crowd. And so their plans to spend this time in a solitary place got supplanted by the people's demand upon them. The only real rest they got was the time they spent on the boat going from point A to point B. For you to have rest, you must be intentional. And by that, I mean you need to build it into the rhythm of your life. Perhaps on a daily basis. Like this 30 minutes every day is just downtime, reflection time, quiet time. Or this day of the week is a sacred day. For me, for many years, it's been Mondays. I just really resist and have been fairly successful over the years, the decades, not scheduling things on Monday that are draining or that are work kinds of things for me. It's the only things that I do are things that are for me restful and for me rejuvenating and re-energizing. For other pastors, including several on my staff, that doesn't work for them. Their rhythm is different. They take Fridays and do that. And that's fine. Maybe it's you setting aside a night of the week and just on this night, nothing else gets scheduled. This is just me time, or this is us time. My wife and I did that for a long while with Friday nights when the kids were still at home. Friday night was family night. We just didn't commit to meetings. We didn't make, arrangements to do stuff or be gone. We, spent family time. It was just a sacred commitment. And then the kids got a little older, and that was like roll your eyes time. Like, who wants to spend Friday night with mom and dad? And so we changed that up, right? But it started out that way. My point is that for each of us, we have to find the rhythm that works for us, but we've got to be intentional about it, is the point. It's a day or it's a time in the week or in the day or in the month or in the calendar year where you intentionally block out time for rest. God said every 7 days. This is how I did it. I want you to mimic that same pattern in your life, and for us today, that's still applicable. But we're not very good at it. Because we've got, in America, and in Western culture in general, this treadmill we've put ourselves on, this pressure that we brought on ourselves, this drive to achieve and accomplish and keep up with and maintain and get to some place of status or accomplishment or whatever it is that drives us, and we just work and work and work and work. And by the way, please don't misunderstand me. I am not in any way undermining a strong work ethic as a thing to be embraced and lived by every one of Jesus' followers. I mean, if you're a Christ follower, you ought to be a shining example of a strong work ethic. Work hard, work well, work with a good attitude, do it unto the Lord, no matter who your boss happens to be or what company you work for, and do that as a way of honoring God. But after that's done, then what? So that's not all there is to life. There should be a life, we should have a sense of our life outside of work, and part of that is embracing this idea of rest. Now, the other thing about it to keep in mind is this, that what's restful for one isn't necessarily restful for the other. And what's restful doesn't necessarily re-energize. So this is where the nuances come into play. It's not just as one-dimensional as we like to think it is. For example, for some guys that I know, and gals, a very restful thing to do is to grab a bunch of golf clubs and go out on a golf course and whack a ball down the field, right? Down the fairway. That is so stressful for me. That is so unappealing to me. Like that would be draining to me. I always tell people this. They say, well, you want to go golf? It's like, well, how long would that take? Oh, 3 or 4 hours to do 18 holes. Hey, if I've got 3 or 4 hours to do something fun, I'd rather do something else because golf is not fun for me, right? I mean, but for you, that might work. For other people, spend 3 or 4 hours to read a good book. I know some people, they schedule trips to Hawaii. They've done this many times. They schedule trips to Hawaii. When they check into the hotel room, they grab their book, they go to the beach, and they sit day after day on the beach reading a good book. And then they get on the plane and fly home. And I'm thinking, how dumb is that? No, seriously, I'm thinking, how dumb is that? Like, I'm not going to spend all that money to fly to Hawaii and pay for a hotel room just to sit on the beach and read a good book. I can do that at home. And it's a whole lot cheaper. If I'm going to Hawaii, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to keep myself busy and have the kind of fun you can only have in Hawaii because I rarely get a chance to go there. It's like a whole different way of approaching that. But for them, that works. My point is they're being intentional, and I am trying to be as well, and you should be as well. Figure out what it is that works for you to help you unwind, decompress, and relax. But then ask this question. Is it relaxation or rejuvenation? Relaxation is where we start. Got to unplug, got to cease from this activity in order to do something else that's restful. But then ask yourself, is it really rejuvenation? See, let me illustrate it this way. Some things that are restful, they're relaxing, aren't necessarily energizing. For me, for example, when I need to recharge my batteries, when emotionally and psychologically I just need, to recharge, I need some alone time doing quiet activities. My wife recharges her batteries by going and hanging out with friends doing something fun, which I like to do too, but when I do it, it's draining, not energizing. In order to do that and enjoy it, I got to have this other time where I recharge my batteries. And not every activity that is relaxing is necessarily rejuvenating. See, my wife and I can almost always agree on what's relaxing. But when it comes to what's going to charge her batteries, it's often very different than what charges my batteries. But it's important to address both aspects of this rest principle because it's not just the inactivity, but it's what happens during that time of inactivity. Let me illustrate it this way. You take a car battery. While it's in the car, hooked up to the car, it's being drained when it's being used and then recharged by the car. And let's just say there's a problem with the car and the battery's gotten down really low, and so you take it out of the car and put it on the workbench in the garage for the purpose of trickle charging it. Some of you know what that is, just a slow way of charging the battery back up while you address whatever the problem is with the car. If that battery is in the car, it's working. If the battery's sitting on the workbench, it's resting. But it's not recharging until I take the trickle charger, plug it in, and hook up the clips to the posts and start putting charge back in. I can be working, I can be resting, or I can be resting and recharging. And that's the layer that I'm trying to encourage us to think through. In other words, to ask the question, what is rejuvenating for you? Because what is rejuvenating for one isn't necessarily so for another. Now, I want to spend the final minutes we have together addressing this question, and that is, why don't you include more true rest in your schedule? And I don't know the answer for you. I know the answer really varies from person to person, but listen, let me just be honest about my journey over the years. I've been in these 3 different places at least at different times. Number one is I remember coming to the realization that where I'd been living, how I'd been conducting myself for years, that there was something flawed about the premise from which I was operating. And the premise was something like this: if it's going to get done, I'm going to do it, and if it's going to get done right, I have to do it myself. Whether it was the family or the church or the job that I had as a side job to pay bills back in those days, it didn't matter. That was kind of the mindset. And there's something about that that's very prideful, and and something about that is very self-reliant, and something about that wars against a reliance on God, because ultimately it doesn't depend on me. And the fact of the matter is there are other people who can do it better than I can, and the idea in my mind that I'm the only one who can get it done and get it done right is a pretty egotistical one. And a lot of times we work harder and longer because that kind of thinking drives our lifestyle. There was another period of time in my life, there's another time when I realized that the treadmill I was on, the gerbil cage I was in, just pedaling as fast as I could go, what was being driven by the idea that I had to provide for my family. It was my job. I was the husband. I was the dad. I got 3 kids at home, a wife that I'm responsible for, the family, and the bills that need to get paid, and the rent, and all the stuff, and the pressure, and it's just like, So I have this job over here, and then I get this job, and then I'm going to supplement it with yet another job because it depends on me, because I've got to provide for my family, and any self-respecting man is going to do that, right? And so I just lived like that until I realized that God wasn't putting that pressure on me, that I was, and that He was capable of providing without me having to go to those extremes. Did He want me to do my part and work, hold down a job, be responsible, show up on time, get the job done? Yes, absolutely. But there was a point at which I just took things right out of His hands and said, I got this because I'm supposed to get this because it's my job and it's my responsibility and I'm going to do it and the pressure's on me. And pretty soon I realized I am just tired. And it was like in those moments of realization, God just said, will you just trust me to provide? Are you your provider or am I? And I realized, wow. And I always justified my lifestyle with the whole strong work ethic speech, right? It's like, I ought to be a strong, hard-working person and set an example for other people. Yes, that's true, but I had carried it to an extreme, and God wanted me to dial it back and embrace rest and trust in Him. And then third area that I realized, and this is more recent, realized was an area that drove my lifestyle and my decisions and my inability to rest, and that is that I had my identity wrapped up too much in the work that I did. I'm a pastor. I serve God. I serve people. I preach God's word. This is who I am. Not what I do, this is who I am. And for a lot of us, it's typical of men, but some women as well. I don't mean to oversimplify or generalize, but it's fairly common among men that we derive a lot of our sense of identity from the work that we do, and we discover that painfully so if we're ever unemployed, because we don't feel like we have any value or worth until we have a job and a gainful means of employment. And I found myself living in that world for a long time, and then finally the Lord began to get through to me. It's like, Craig, where did you get this idea? Pastor isn't who you are. Pastoring is what you do. Who you are is my son. Who you are is a man who is created in my image, a man who's been called into relationship with me. Craig, you're a man, and you have a life apart from pastoring. That's just what you do. It's not who you are. Your identity is wrapped up too much in that and not enough in me. And as I began to make the shift, guess what? A whole lot more rest began to come into my life because I wasn't driven by trying to reinforce my identity through the work that I was doing. I don't know what your answer to the question is. Why do you not schedule more intentional, true rest into your schedule? I don't know why. For you, it may be one of those 3 things that I just enumerated, or it might be something else. But I know this, as Americans, we're not very good at it, and the statistics bear it out. Of all the nations in North and South America, we're the only nation that does not have a national law that mandates a cap on how many hours a week people can work. Every other nation does. We're the only nation out of 130-some nations that already have laws. We're the only nation that does not have laws that mandate that there be some family leave provision. Now, we have a Family Leave Act being implemented here in Washington State, but nationally, no such law. And 130 plus other nations in the world have those laws, but we're not one of them because we're Americans, because we work hard, because rest is not in our DNA, because we drive harder and produce more and accomplish greater things because we work. And we don't know how to rest very well. Well, for your rest to be rejuvenating, you must be intentional. You got to figure out what it is that energizes you. For me, I can park the camping trailer at the campground, grab a John Grisham book, and lay on the bed all day and read for hours. I mean, for me, that charges my batteries. And then I'm ready to go for a walk or ride my bike, have some fun with friends, but I need that recharge time. For you, that might sound as boring as all get out. That's great. Figure out what it is that is rejuvenating and do that on purpose. In other words, schedule, and here we're going to summarize now, schedule inactivity into your life. Unplug from this or that or whatever the thing is that you need to take a break from. Schedule inactivity into your life. And then number 2, do things that are rejuvenating. Now, the irony is not lost on me. Schedule inactivity and do things. Like who sees the oxymoron there? And I'm not talking about the guy up in front. He's not an oxymoron. That's an oxymoron there. But it's really not. Think it through with me. So I need to schedule in activity. So I'm going to stop doing some physical things. Maybe I have a physical labor job. I'm going to schedule inactivity, but then I'm going to intentionally do things during that time when I'm not physically working, like read a book or go to the lake and go fishing or whatever it is that's rejuvenating to me. Or I have an intellectual job. I do a lot of thinking and decision making at my job. Maybe it's a desk job. I'm going to take a break from that. I'm going to schedule inactivity, and I'm going to do things that are physical in nature that keep me distracted from that and are energizing to me because it's a change of pace. So it's inactivity from the thing that is my work, but it might be doing things in the other areas. Remember, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual areas of my life all need to be addressed, and that's where the nuances come into play. If we're just intentional about scheduling inactivity from the things that drain us and do things that are rejuvenating, things that energize us, we'll do a whole lot better at embracing rest in our lives. I'm going to end on this note, Psalm 127, verse 2. This is something that God's spoken to me many times in recent times. It is useless, Craig, you can put your name in there. It is useless, Craig, for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, anxiously working for food to eat, and this next phrase, for God gives rest to his loved ones. It's interesting in the Hebrew, the translators have a fun time with this. One translation says, for God gives to his beloved, even in their sleep. And there are various other translations, but the idea is simply this. While you're sleeping, God's at work. While your head's on the pillow, God's got you covered. While you're taking time to rest because it's important and it makes you that much more productive when you do work, by the way, all the research bears that out. After about 50 hours a week, 55 hours a week, productivity drops like you went off the edge of a cliff. You're actually a better worker if you take time, come back to work, you're more productive in a shorter amount of hours than you are in a long period of time. And God's just saying, if you'll just embrace that, if you'll just get this, if you'll just trust me to have you, to take care of your needs, to watch over you, to look out for you. If you just trust me, find your identity in me, and trust me to make ends meet and things to work out like they need to. If you just do that, I'm going to bless you even while you're resting. I'm going to be at work while you're at play. I'm going to help you even when you're not paying attention to the things that matter in your life. And the reason for that is why? Because he loves us. He gives to his loved ones. He's like, Craig, I love you, and I got you, and I'm not going to let things go sideways. Things aren't going to unravel just because you're not paying attention to them, because when you're resting like I want you to, I've got it. Let me give you an example. Chick-fil-A. Anybody like Chick-fil-A? Coming to the Spokane area, I understand. Some people are real enthusiastic about that. Might not be your thing, but Chick-fil-A is run by believers, Christ followers, who intentionally made a decision not to be open on Sundays. They did it years ago. And of all the fast food restaurant chains, they are the highest grossing fast food chain in America, even though none of their stores is open on Sunday, which in the fast food world is one of the highest grossing days to be open. But they said, no, we won't do it. We're going to take a rest on that day, encourage all of our employees to take a rest. We're going to give the company a rest. And guess what? God blesses them even when they're taking a break. It works at a corporate level, an individual level. It works for your family, it works for me, and it works for you if we'll just embrace it and walk in it and trust God in it. Rest. Next week, we're going to talk about an aspect of rest that God wants to do for our soul at a level that we haven't really addressed very well yet today, but we will next week. You don't want to miss that. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for loving us and for taking care of us and for watching.